Windsor, the Queen's Lodge, the last days of October, 1788. A man opens his journal and writes down something he has never had to write before. His master has become peevish. His master is agitated. His master will not stop talking. What he starts recording that week is the first page of the best documented mental illness of the 18th century, and of a mistake that outlives everyone in the building. The man is Robert Fulke Greville. Equerry. 7 years standing 3 feet from the king every day, close enough to know exactly what normal sounds like. It's the talking he keeps coming back to. Incessant is his word, incoherent. It runs over the top of the answers. That journal is still at Windsor. And the voice in it belongs to King George III. He's 50, 28 years on the throne. 15 children and a farm he actually works. And by Christmas he'll be tied to a bed by his own doctors, while 2 political parties in London read a daily report on whether he's getting better. So here's where tonight goes. 3 things happen to this man. Only one is the illness. The second is what happens to him in a house at Kew, with eyewitnesses writing it down as it happens. The third happens in 1966, long after he's dead, and it does more damage than either. Nothing here is a diagnosis I'm making. Every symptom has a date on it, a witness and a signature. Where the specialists still argue, I'll stop and tell you they argue. Now, start with the version you've probably got. If you know this story, you know it from a film. 1994. Nigel Hawthorne's Face, and it's a good film. Alan Bennett trained as a historian before he wrote plays, and he'd read the sources. But stay in your seat for the last 30 seconds. The film ends, and 2 panels of white text come up on black. They tell you the color of the king's urine points to a disease called porphyria, and that porphyria is periodic, unpredictable, hereditary. That's the last thing millions of people were told about him. And look at what that sentence does. If it's porphyria, George III was never mentally ill. He had a chemical fault that made him behave strangely. His mind was clean. It's a kind thing to believe about a man. Hold on to how kind it is, because we're coming back to it. But in October 1788, nobody has any of this. Nobody has a word. So who is he before the voice starts? He's the dullest king England ever had, and he'd take that as a compliment. They call him Farmer George because he genuinely cares about crop rotation. He's up before the household. He reads his own state papers. He writes his own letters in his own hand, thousands of them. And at the top of each one, he puts where he is, the date and the time, sometimes to the minute. Remember the man who writes down the time. He's going to matter more than anyone in this story. That summer, he'd been sick. Stomach pain, bad enough that he spent 5 weeks at Cheltenham drinking the waters. He comes back. The pain comes back with him. And then in late October, something else arrives on top of it, and it's the talking. So how do we know all this? In this much detail, minute by minute, from 240 years ago? Because this is the most watched sick room of the century, and everybody in it had a pen. Greville's got his journal. Frances Burney, the novelist inside the household as one of the Queen's women, is keeping her own. The doctors are keeping notes that will eventually fill more than 100 volumes. And then there's the thing I can't get over. Every morning at 10, somebody walks out of that house with 1 sheet of paper and takes it to the government. What the king did in the night, whether he slept, what had to be done to him. The Royal College of Physicians in London still has more than 60 of them. And think what that piece of paper is. A fixed hour, daily, on the condition of the one man at the top, handed to people deciding that same morning whether to keep backing him or start backing his successor. That's not a doctor's note. That's a disclosure, and both sides are reading it before lunch. Here's why that turns vicious, fast. If the king can't function, someone has to act for him, and there's only one candidate, his eldest son. The Prince of Wales is 26. He can't stand his father, and he's politically married to Charles James Fox and the opposition. The Prime Minister, William Pitt, is in his 20s and owes his career to the king. So, George recovers. Pitt survives. George doesn't. Fox walks in. Pitt is finished. That's the room the bulletins are being written into. Every adjective on that sheet of paper is worth a government, and the men signing it know that. And in the middle of it, Queen Charlotte. 27 years married to him, now kept in another part of the house, getting less news about her own husband than her son gets. On the 30th of January, the prince sits down and writes her a long, careful letter telling her she shouldn't accept control of the king's household if a regency happens. Charlotte reads it, then she takes it and she hands it to Pitt. She's the only one in this story who picks a side and picks it clean. Meanwhile, in the house, it's got much worse. The 29th of November, the doctors decide he's leaving Windsor. They're moving him to Kew, where he can be out of sight. He won't get out of bed. So Pitt comes up to Windsor himself to talk him into it, and fails. And then something happens that tells you how far this has gone. The doctors take the Prime Minister into a side room and instruct him. Instruct him? To write the king a note demanding he go. They show him the note. He gets agitated. He tries to write back and can't finish it. And then the doctors come into the room together as a group, and he goes for one of them. Dr. Richard Warren. His own equerries have to pull the King of England off his physician. 3:45 that afternoon, he agrees to go. One condition, his equerries ride with him. And that's the bit to keep. A group of men have decided where he sleeps tonight. He doesn't get a vote, so he negotiates for the only thing left. Who's in the carriage? 6 days later, they bring in the doctor you've seen in the film. And he isn't what you were shown. Francis Willis is 70. Clergyman as well as physician, and he runs a private madhouse in Lincolnshire where the patients work in the fields. A noblewoman recommends him. He is not a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians. And the college men already at the bedside describe him in writing as little better than a quack. So now there are 2 schools in one house, over one patient. The college men look at his urine and treat the body. Purges, bloodletting, blistering the skin, antimony. Willis ignores the body and goes for the behavior. Routine, rewards when he complies, and when he doesn't, restraint. In corporate terms, and this is the only comparison I'll make for a while, the board has brought in an outside specialist over the objections of everyone already in the job, and he reports separately. Look what that does. On New Year's Day, Willis sends the Prince of Wales a bulletin saying the king is improving, and he signs it alone. The same day, a second bulletin goes out, co-signed with 2 of the college doctors, and that one says only that the patient is rather better than usual. 2 statements. Same morning, same patient. 2 different jobs being protected, and you can read both of them today. And through all of it, Greville is in the room, writing down what the treatment actually looks like. The 20th of December. The king becomes ungovernable. Greville's word. They put him in the strait waistcoat. They tie his legs. They fasten him down across the chest. And then Greville writes the detail that gets me, which is when he saw it. That's how he found him. Coming in to make his morning inquiries, like it was a normal Tuesday. There's one more piece of paper from that month I still can't quite believe. 18th of December. A doctor named Lucas Pepys sits down to write to the Prince of Wales to tell him his father has got worse. Pepys is a baronet, a Fellow of the Royal Society, physician extraordinary to the King, serious man, and he gives a cause. The King, he writes, has been reading King Lear. You can laugh at that. Most people do. But that's a formal medical report from a senior royal doctor to the heir to the throne, and the clinical finding in it is a Shakespeare play. Maybe he meant the emotion of it. Maybe he meant that the king had been sitting there reading about a mad king. Either way, he put it in writing. So who decides what counts as a symptom? In 1788, the answer is men with no category for what's in front of them, reaching for whatever's nearest. Keep that, because the same reflex comes back in 1966 with much better credentials. Now, there's one more scene at Kew, and it's the one that stayed with me. The 2nd of February. Frances Burney is second keeper of the robes to the Queen, and she's been ordered to take air and exercise for her own health, ordered by Lucas Pepys, the same Pepys, the King Lear man. So every morning she asks where the king will be before she goes out. That morning, John Willis tells her Richmond, so she walks into Kew Gardens, and halfway round through the trees she sees figures. Gardeners, she assumes. Then she looks properly. It's him, with his attendants. She turns and runs, full speed, in skirts, through the gardens of a royal palace. And then she hears the thing she later describes as the worst terror of her life. She's being chased, he is calling her name, and he is running after her. He catches her, and here's the part nobody expects. He puts his hands on her shoulders, he kisses her cheek, and then he talks about the household, about her father, who he's fond of, and about Handel, who he loves, about what he means to put right when this is over. Behind them, both Willises, the father and the son, are calling at him not to overheat himself. He isn't listening. That's the illness. One morning, one eyewitness, no theory needed, not the monster in the cell you were sold. A frightened woman running from a man who is warm, courteous, affectionate, and cannot stop. And Burney records something else he'd said earlier to his own son. I wish I might die, for I am going to be mad. He knew. While it was happening, he knew. And now the part the film gets right and nobody remembers. He fights. All the way through it, he keeps trying to do the one thing that is unmistakably him. He writes. He never dictates. He drafts. He crosses out. He starts again. The 23rd of February, coming back to himself, he picks up his correspondence with Pitt in his own hand. That draft still exists, and it is covered in crossings out, which is exactly what his handwriting always did when he was hunting for the right words about something that mattered. He looks back at what happened to him. Then he asks about work. And here, if you stopped watching, the story looks finished. 3 days later, the bulletin says it plainly, an entire cessation of His Majesty's illness. Pitt's Regency Bill has already gone through the Commons and is sitting waiting for the Lords. It never gets there. The 10th of March, Parliament sends its congratulations, and London puts candles in the windows. Thomas Jefferson is in town that night and calls the illuminations universal, brilliant, and beautiful. In April, there's a national Thanksgiving at St. Paul's, royal procession, printers rushing out engravings while the crowds are still there. And the man who comes out of it best is the one they called a quack. Parliament votes Francis Willis a pension of £1,000 a year. His portrait goes on sale as an engraving that year. The National Portrait Gallery still has copies. He gets so famous he opens a second asylum. The Queen of Portugal sends for him. Recovery, fireworks, credit handed out. Everyone goes home, except the file stays open another 31 years. And the worst thing that happens to this man hasn't happened yet, and none of these people do it. He goes down again in 1801, again in 1804. Then, in 1810, at 70, he goes down and doesn't come back. Blind, deaf, living in rooms at Windsor while his son runs the country. Charlotte, given charge of him, dies first. He dies in January 1820, having outlived nearly everybody who argued about him. And the notes, all 100-plus volumes, go into an archive, where they sit, largely unread, for nearly a century and a half. Now, 1966. Two psychiatrists, a mother and her son, publish a paper in the British Medical Journal. Ida McAlpine and Richard Hunter. Serious people, and their argument is enormous. George III was never mentally ill at all. He had porphyria, an inherited fault in the blood, and they don't stop at him. They trace it back through the Hanovers, through the Stuarts, all the way to Mary Queen of Scots. Their best single piece of evidence is the color of his urine sitting there in the notes. Dark. And here's the thing about how ideas move. The people who actually treat porphyria object almost immediately. One of them publishes in the same journal 2 years later. They lose, because McAlpine and Hunter pick up historians, and physicians, and fellows of the Royal Society, even a Nobel laureate. Within 10 years, it's the standard answer. By the 80s, it's in textbooks. Then it's on the board on the wall at the historic house, next to the room where it happened, where a family reads it on a Sunday. Then a composer writes music about it. Then Bennett writes the play. Then the film puts it in white letters. Watch what just happened there. It stopped being a claim and became the caption. And you don't argue with the caption. You just read it and walk to the next room. That's a rebrand, not a correction. And a rebrand travels, because it's short and it's flattering, and it closes the question. You already know which one gets shared. So why did everybody want it so badly? Be honest, because the answer is decent. If it's porphyria, the royal family produced no madness, just chemistry. A blood disorder carries no shame. A psychiatric diagnosis in 1966 attached to that family carried a great deal. The kindest answer was also the most convenient one, and it came from two psychiatrists, which made it look like the opposite of special pleading. And then, from about 2010, a doctor called Timothy Peters went and did the thing nobody had bothered to do. He read the notes, all of them. And the disease doesn't fit the man, not loosely, at all. The version they'd settled on hits about 3 people in 1 million. Its attacks bring a specific, unrelenting stomach pain. George's came and went. It brings skin lesions and sunlight. George never had them. Psychiatric symptoms show up in under 1% of attacks. And then there's the number. Porphyria is hereditary. That's the whole argument. It's what the film's second panel tells you. George III had 15 children. And their children had children in one of the most medically examined families on earth. Run the rates, and about 180 living descendants should have it. Visibly, diagnosably. The number reported is 0, not low. 0. Not one confirmed case in any generation in 200 years. Now, there's a real fight here, and I won't flatten it. In 2005, another team got hold of surviving strands of the king's hair. They were hunting for DNA. They found arsenic, 17 parts per million, in hair where under 1 is normal. And they traced it to the medicine. The stuff they poured into him contained antimony, and in the 18th century, antimony came contaminated with arsenic. That team thinks the arsenic made his porphyria attacks worse. Peters thinks there were no porphyria attacks to make worse. They're still arguing about the disease. They do not argue about this. He was being slowly poisoned by the men trying to cure him. And the notes are blunt about how it went in, by force or by trick. In 1811, one of his doctors wrote that His Majesty's medicine was given him by force at 7 in the morning, and that it had made him worse all day, which leaves the question this whole thing has been walking towards. If it wasn't porphyria, what was it? And this is where the man himself finally gets to answer. Because remember what he did, every single day, for 50 years. He wrote, "A team in London took hundreds of his political letters, his own hand, from before the crisis, during it, and after, and fed them to a machine, not to read them for meaning, to measure them. How wide is the vocabulary? How long are the clauses? How much does he repeat himself? And then they did the clever bit. They gave the machine control groups. They fed it letters from other times he was under enormous pressure. But well, the Falklands crisis, losing America. Then the same winter months in healthy years, in case it was just the season. On those, the machine finds nothing. It can't tell them apart. Then they give it the letters from the winter of the illness, and it separates them immediately. The vocabulary narrows. He repeats himself. The writing gets flatter, more predictable, carrying less and less. And the clauses start hooking together, and but so, and one thought running into the next with nowhere to stop. That last one has a name in psychiatry. It's what pressured speech and racing thought look like when you force them down a pen. The team are careful. They say on their own it isn't proof of mania. But look what it matches. Incessant talking, agitation, incoherence. Written down by a man standing in a corridor at Windsor in October 1788, listening to a voice that wouldn't stop. He'd been telling us the whole time, in his own handwriting, catalogued, shelved, and never read. So what did the wrong answer cost? It cost him his last 10 years. Because the moment you decide this is a body problem and not a mind problem, historians stop trying to explain any of it. His offers to abdicate whenever the pressure came, the way he held failing policies long after the evidence turned, what happened between him and his sons, all shrugged off as chemistry, which means the version of this king you inherited has a decade missing out of the middle of it. And there's one more casualty, and it's the sharpest thing in the story. Francis Willis and his colleagues have spent 60 years being remembered as the men who tied a sick king to a chair for nothing. Because if it was chemistry, the restraint was just cruelty. But if it was mania, something else was going on in that house. A country doctor with no credentials and a farm full of patients was attempting behavioral treatment on the most powerful man in Europe. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't modern, but it wasn't nothing. And it isn't the Willis you were shown. Louis Namier once wrote that the unqualified practitioner must not be let loose, not even on the dead. In this story, the unqualified man was the one at the bedside. The qualified ones did the damage from 150 years away. They wanted to spare a king the word everybody was frightened of. What they took from him instead was the only explanation that made the end of his life mean anything. And then they handed it to a film to put on a screen in white letters as the last thing you read. He never stopped talking. It took 2 centuries and a machine to finally hear him,